We've got two special guests that we want to bring in here, and folks have got to watch this film before the election. I think. I mean, also, I think it's something. It's a fascinating topic because I don't think these people are going to go away. But let's play a clip first off of their film, and it's called Man Card. And it was made by Lucas Sabin and Peter Hutch. Here is the trailer. Play this, Brandon.
This is a nation of laws, and as Abraham Lincoln has said, no one is above the law, no one is below the law, and we're going to enforce the law, and Americans should remember that if we're going to have law and order.
I am sick and tired of the argument about whether some effort to enforce law and order is going to escalate anything at all. Plain truth of the matter is this has to stop, and it has to stop like the day before yesterday.
Put 100,000 new police officers on the streets of American cities.
Anything that is actually masculine anymore is now a stick to be beaten.
Real men do not suck at the teat of big government.
The left has culturally tried to feminize this country in a way that is disgusting.
I'm gonna bomb the shit out of them. Bye. Go home to mommy. Go home to mommy.
And you see blue-collar voters, men. This is like their last vestige, their last hope is Donald Trump to get their masculinity back.
The crime and violence that today afflicts our nation will soon come to an end. We will be a country of law and order.
So here we have Peter Hutchinson and Lucas Sabin. Oh, you got a Majority Report sweatshirt on.
It was my birthday present this year, a couple of months ago. So I figured this is my shot.
Fantastic. I should have.
Sam, I'll have you know he's very proud of that sweatshirt.
Oh well, I'm really. I thank you for wearing it. That's very exciting. So, film guy Matthew reached out and said you got to check this out. Of course, he did it yesterday, and you guys rolling this film out. It looks fascinating. Lucas, let's start with you since you're wearing a sweatshirt. This notion. I mean, one of the things, to the extent that Donald Trump has driven out any voters, new voters in this election, it is white men, non-college educated, in some of these Rust Belt states. The registration is up on Democrats. What is that? This is the cohort that you guys are talking about, right? And it's like it's not just these people. It's almost a, I mean, how would you describe it? It's not an ideology, but it is a sort of like a mode of thought.
Yeah. First off, I will say that this film was created by Jackson Katz, and he wrote a book called Man Enough. And so over the summer, we collaborated with him and the Media Education Foundation to make this film, and we were, really pushing to get it out before the election because we felt like it was a great film to kind of start a discussion. I think it's so easy for us to kind of get locked into certain ways of talking about things that at least here you have an hour that, traces 50 years of the rightward swing in our country, but, mostly done by the Republican Party. And, and I know, Sam, I watch the show almost every day. You talk a lot about how Donald Trump didn't come out of nowhere, and I think that's what this film is trying to show. Now, as far as the voters go, Trump won, I think, the biggest margin ever since 1980 polling with high school educated white men. Right, it was a huge gap, like 48% gap, and with college educated men was, I think, 15 or 16 points. And from the recent Biden polling stuff I've seen. Obviously he's been doing really great with white suburban women, but that gap is narrowing dramatically. And and I think if we see a Biden victory, a week from Tuesday, it'll be really interesting to see how this dynamic played out. So that's what I would say.
All right. Well, so Peter, tell us just a little bit about tell us a little bit about this sort of, I guess, mode of thought, like this sort of this idea of, I guess, sort of white male identity politics on some level.
Well, I think the film looks at it in terms of a dynamic that the GOP sort of started to harness to their own ends as far back as Nixon, when it was all, a lot of it had to do, the hard hat riots were a pivotal moment back in the 60s with Nixon and how they started to look at the electorate. And as we explain in the film, Nixon knew that he couldn't promise working men better jobs, better health care, better life, but he could give them cultural recognition. He could underscore the importance of the white working man as the backbone of this country. And he could basically raise their profile as being sort of, the heart and soul of our nation. So he may have not been able to give them anything material, but he knew that there was a way to appeal to this psychological need and yearning for to feel good about yourself as a man. And the GOP has done a just really tremendous job of really harnessing this power for 5 decades, and you can see them return to this time and time again. It's really not rocket science. As you watch these 5 decades unfold in the film, it actually becomes quite predictable and redundant what these candidates are going to say.
Lucas, is that? This was an opportunity for the Republicans, I guess, that was a function of essentially the emancipatory movement for women in this country, and to the extent that the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act brought about at least some measure of equity in our society, or at least started to have institutional support for that. Let's say that's what this is, right? It's an aggrievement that comes from the perceived loss of status that comes with other people gaining more status. This is sort of my zero sum thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you saw it, rear its ugly head in the kind of the backlash to Obama in 2008. Because I think he represented, obviously he was our first African American president, but he also represented a different kind of masculinity. Remember when after one of the shootings, when he was on TV and he openly cried, right? That's unfathomable for the vast majority of Republicans. Just that you played the Rush Limbaugh moment the other day, where he's finally had a little bit of an emotional moment around the fact that he's staring death in the face, and then Mark Savage goes after him for being a wimp. It's just, they keep doubling down on this philosophy, I think, really until it's completely broken, and hopefully that's what we're seeing, is that we have seen enough of modeling of a different kind of behavior by men that this is just a completely losing ideology.
Limbaugh participated mightily in the notion of the feminization.
That's right, and he's actually a big part of the film. We spend certainly a moment of when he first came to the rise, and then he's a little bit of a thread throughout the film. It's just things kind of keep getting added on top over the years, and then Trump just makes it all so much more explicit, instead of them like kind of using dog whistle law and order, like Trump just like tweets out law and order, it's
He's not been very good about doing anything other than the subtext.
Exactly. It's like he gets his 3 speaking points and he just like reads the speaking points without putting any degree of subtlety around it,
Yes. I mean, it's like when he came out and said like suburban women, like they, I'm not supposed to say that we slice up the demographics this way.
It's almost like he's only reading the headlines and the memos that he's been handed to him in terms of talking points.
There's no sort of like nuance built around it or any type of like packaging. But Peter, let me ask you this. If it is the case that when Nixon pursued the strategy, and part of it was a function, if I'm not mistaken, Patrick Buchanan saying, look, we're going to splice the country in half, and it's going to be centered around these themes on some level, right? Like real Americans are essentially either white men or extensions of white men in some fashion. They weren't that explicit with it. We're going to cut the country in half and we'll have the bigger half. It feels like the strategy that Trump is pursuing is the exact same strategy. However, it's not the bigger half anymore. And
That's
so
right.
you need to depress the vote and all these other
That's
things.
right. That's
So
right.
with that premise, what is the future? Is it as Lucas says, like we're modeling a different perspective on how men, white men function in our society, or is it we're also, maybe it's not and or waiting for that cohort to essentially die? I mean,
well, I don't think it's an either or, and I think it's a complicated scenario. I think, Lucas is like, hey, I think they're just going to drive this model and this dynamic into the ground until it's broken. But I think to your point, it's the shifting demographic that's going to make a huge difference here. I mean, the voting power of the American white male it's diminishing, with each year. And also, I have another film that Lucas and I collaborated on that's out on a virtual screening tour right now as well, which is called Healing from Hate, Battle for the Soul of a Nation. Worked for several years with these ex-neo-Nazis and skinheads who now help people get out of hate groups. And it's a real deep dive into sort of the core issues around masculinity that drive these sorts of things. So I think it's incredibly nuanced and complicated. I think my fear is that the more that demographic shrinks, that the more disempowered those white men are going to feel, and the more extreme their behaviors will be in response.
Getting into the white knuckle territory, where they're
absolutely
hanging on to that, and it's the last vestige of this, and it's
right.
The Alamo.
Right. It's the Alamo. I was going to say that's right. It's their Alamo, and they're not going to go quietly. And I think that's for me that's the danger here. That's the worst case scenario, and I think that's why these conversations around masculinity and where we're heading with masculinity and how we define masculinity are so crucial right now.
Well, okay.
And I would also say that this, Peter and I have been kind of on like a 4-year journey with this. We started out making this film, Healing from Hate, which is making the tour now, and which is based on the sociologist Michael Kimmel's work. He wrote a book called Angry White Men, I think in 2012. And we had so much material when we were making that film that we splintered off a half-hour film called Angry White Men, Masculinity in the Age of Trump, which is, you can see on iTunes. And it gets more into those issues around, well, what do you do? Like, what are the next four, like, let's say Biden wins, and, how do we address this issue? It's if we just, stiff arm the issue, we're going to, as Peter pointed out, it's just going to be that much worse in 4 years. So, obviously one of the models would be like the New Deal kind of thing where, there's such a vast infrastructure rehaul that needs to be done in this country that putting people to work and giving people a sense of worth through their jobs, that you can make, that you can support your family by working a normal, 40-hour week and have healthcare and send your kid to college. And that's just not possible anymore. And so the discrepancy of what you were told to be as a man, from your dad and your grandpa, which is, you bring home the bacon and you provide, men can't do that anymore. And so you have this gap of what you've been told and what the reality of your life is. And then what are you going to do? Where are you going to point the finger? Global capitalism, or the guy down the street who you perceive took your job,
This was where was the next question, was that relationship between material deprivation and this identity. And that seems to be the sort of the nub of it on some level, is that men in our society have been raised traditionally, and society has put these expectations on them that may be different than for women, and expectations of white men. I'm not justifying this at all. I want people to understand that, but society has imposed certain expectations on white men. Look at all the, white men. I got the inside track to be president, and it creates certain expectations that if our society is, and even if it's preventing other people from rising up, the expectations that you have internalized become more problematic. And the suggestion is, did you guys find evidence in the course of this film and in making the other ones that those material benefits can alleviate that sense of failure that may be coming out of
100%. I think the analogy that I would hear time and time again is what's the most common sort of expectation around being a white man in America? It's to be the breadwinner. It's to be able to provide for your family. That's sort of at the core of, masculinity, is your responsibility and ability to provide for your family. And, a lot of these guys, and I'm going to reference these guys who end up in hate groups, but I think one of the things that, Michael Kimmel likes to frame these through is, one of the ways to understand what's happening in the center is to take a look at what's happening on the extremes. And that will give you some really kind of key insights into, what's going to drive the middle as well, right? And a lot of what drives these guys into these hate group affiliations is it's not just the material deprivation, but it's also these issues around trauma and shame and identity and this need for belonging and this need for power and this need for meaning. And they're all tied together, and so for me, it even goes deeper than just pure materialism. It also has to do with, our health system and the access to mental health services that people need, because, these affiliations in these hate groups, it's often there to, it's compensatory. It's there as this temporary, boost to compensate for this these feelings of inadequacy and these feelings around deprivation.
Can I jump in here for a second? How Peter just described, studying the extremes, and we just had a screening of our latest film, which is a work in progress screening that we just had in Arkansas for a film called Devil Put the Coal in the Ground, which is a film about West Virginia. And what we're trying to do in that film is, tie together these different aspects of environmental destruction and the opioid crisis, and how those things are related. They don't live in these, siloed worlds. Right. And so, in West Virginia, those problems are really kind of easier to see because they only have one industry, pretty much the coal industry that, has been declining over these years. So the issues that are kind of going to be facing the rest of the country are really a bellwether in that state, and so
in the coal mine, as it were.
Canary in the coal mine. That's right.
We didn't want to use that as the title, but
All right, well, guys, where can people see this film and your other works?
So the Man Card is streaming for free through Election Day, and you can go to themancardmovie.com, and that's where we'll have updates around the movie and such. And I will also plug, Jackson Katz, just the lead article on Ms. Magazine right now does a deeper dive into that film. So I would encourage viewers to go check that out. Healing from Hate is at healingfromhatefilm.com, I believe. And that has all kinds of virtual screenings. I live up in Dutchess County, and we're having a screening on Tuesday outdoors, So check that out. There's
if you're in Portland, we have a screening coming up that is being hosted by the Oregon Coalition Against Hate Crimes. Beacon Film Society is sponsoring a screening this upcoming week up in Beacon, New York. Glimmerglass Film Days in November. We're looking to have upwards of 100 screenings by the holidays. So if you go to the website, you can see the screening updates.
Great. All right. Well, we'll put links to all those sites in our podcast and YouTube description today. Lucas Saban and Peter Hutchinson, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having us, Sam. It's awesome.